Our first speaker is Ameet Kallarackal. He's a junior in CSOP, majoring in computer science and philosophy. He plays for the BC men's club soccer team and is fascinated by emerging market growth in Latin America. He will be living in the strip mall next year. Without further ado, here's Ameet.
Thank you. When I was 14 years old, I was afraid of nearly everything. The dark, heights, talking to anybody, and even I was afraid of dogs, so it was pretty bad. I was tense and I was self-conscious, as I still am to some extent. I was afraid of anything beyond where I was. When I was 14, I couldn't even walk into my own basement by myself in the middle of the day. When I was 14, I got a call from a neighbor who wanted me to chaperone her 11-year-old kid and his best friend at a park. But not just any park, an amusement park, Six Flags. Six Flags represented all of my greatest fears rolled into one. But it was okay, I'd just be the cool older kid sitting there already jaded by roller coasters eating Dippin' Dots. But to my utter shock, that's not what happened at all. We were driving in, and even a mile away we saw Goliath. It was brand new, and it was the biggest and the fastest roller coaster. My heart was racing just looking at it. But I told myself the lines would be too long to go on and it'd be okay. But sure enough, for the first time in history, Six Flags was empty. The kids turned to me with eyes wide open and say, "Let's go." And so my great dilemma, the greatest dilemma of my life to this point, unfolded. The only other time I'd ever been on a roller coaster was at Universal Studios. My dad told me, "You would love this, just try it and you're gonna have a great time." It was the worst experience of my life. I was holding onto the bar the entire time and I got blisters. I was crying, my eyes were closed, and I hated every second of it. And I told myself, I swore that I would never go on a roller coaster again. And so here I was, right, afraid of roller coasters to death. But I was supposed to be a cool high school kid, willing to do anything. I couldn't lose face to 11-year-olds. And even given all of that fear, my pride was so high that I began to convince myself it would be all right. Just once, I'll sit rows behind them so they don't see me cry. They won't see me dying, and it'll be okay. So we went on Goliath, and I hated every second of it, again. My hands were already starting to blister, I was crying the entire time, and it was terrible. And we got off the ride, and the kids came up to me and said, "That was awesome, let's do it again." And as illogical as it seems, for some reason, I did it again. And it still sucked. I hated it again, but this time my hands were a bit looser on the bar, and I looked up every once in a while. We went on Goliath 5 times, and by the 5th time, my arms were soaring high, and I didn't blink a single time. I had the time of my life. What? That was my reaction when I got home that night. What just happened? How did that happen? In one day, I had overcome my fear of roller coasters. But it didn't just teach me to stop being afraid of roller coasters. It taught me that I could stop being afraid of something. That fear was not just a rule, not just a given. It was something that might change like the rest of the complex human spirit. I was not just a fearful person. That could be changed. And that brings me to mental hack number 1. For the most part, we are identity-seeking creatures. We love BuzzFeed quizzes that tell us if we're a llama or an alpaca. We thrive on giving ourselves labels, and we love finding groups that we belong to. But as soon as we tell ourselves that we belong to a certain group, we begin the process of limiting ourselves to that state of mind, to what that group is defined as. I get nervous when I speak in front of large audiences. I'm a Democrat. I don't like spicy food. You can define a static entity with static words and static traits. But by doing the same thing to yourself, you who has boundless capacity for dynamism, you're wasting valuable potential. When we look at ourselves from 5 years ago today, we're obviously a very different person. We've changed a lot. And although the trajectory suggests that you're likely to continue changing, we're so willing to tell ourselves that we are X or Y, and that holds us back. I don't believe identity is necessary or even a good thing, unless it is defined as being in flux and open to change. After going on Goliath and having my life shattered, I thought I'd give the Goliath treatment to more things that I hated. I would do something I hated until it became tolerable, and then comfortable, and then enjoyable. I'd take a new step down my basement each day until I felt comfortable spending nights there. I'd take cold showers until I began to crave them. I'd intentionally raise my hand in class to ask questions, which I had written down beforehand and memorized, but I found myself not even realizing it anymore. And repeatedly, I found myself more capable of doing things, and I felt underlying tension slip away in the process. And slowly, a rule began to emerge. Let's call it mental hack number 2. If you don't want to do something, but it won't hurt anybody, do it. One of the most counterintuitive life mottos you can think of, but it does wonders for personal growth. I don't like eggplant. I don't want to wear that shirt. I don't want to help him out right now. I don't want to give a BC talk. For the most part, when thoughts like this come over us, we say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I just won't do it. Or, more commonly, we won't think about it at all. We don't think because we don't want to do something, we should do it. When what you don't want to do becomes what you want to do, you'll find yourself to be a pretty flexible and free person. When you can consider any negative space, some sort of failure, to be a success, you'll find yourself to be a pretty successful person. But you have to be uncompromising with yourself. As with any rule that exists, even breaking it once is a slippery slope. To maximize the gains, the mental gains, you have to do it every time. Every time you don't want to wear that shirt, you have to wear it. You wear it until you no longer care. See, our bodies are so adaptable, and they're more adaptable than we have ever imagined. For an example, if you start a fasting routine, maybe not eating for the first 8 hours that you're awake each day, the first few days will inevitably suck. You'll be starving, but you won't die. And if you remain disciplined for just a few days, you'll find that your body is totally okay with it. And that's important. And that's so important because fasting, for instance, can unveil some amazing benefits. And it extends far beyond anything that has to do with just fasting, because you're missing out on so much opportunity if you just listen to your body. Let's say there's 10 cavemen and women. One of them has a tendency to go off and live on their own. Without others to procreate or protect, that individual will likely die. With them, critically, is the internal mechanism that caused this tendency, the gene it's attributed to, the instinct that fades as well. Thousands of years go by with evolution, and the characteristics that are more catered to our species' survival tend to still be around. And that evolution isn't just affecting our outward appearances, but our most innate subliminal habits. We don't have to walk around and tell ourselves to stay in communities. We do that naturally. It's ingrained in our subconscious. But while some of those habits are great for humanity, they aren't necessarily optimized for individuals. Number 3. Our instincts help us survive, but they aren't necessarily the best tools for thriving. Evolution just happened the way it did. It's not a perfect system. It paints with a broad brush and goes outside the lines. It's critical to become hyper-aware of our actions because for the most part, they happen without us thinking about them or feeling them. And that is a limitation because it means we will be doing things out of habit without questioning whether or not they are actually best for us. You might naturally gag at something that smells, or turn away when you see something that's ugly. But what if taking a huge inhale or looking right at the source of the ugliness is the best way to overcome the pain? We have this natural tendency to ignore and avoid what makes us uncomfortable or afraid. But that's a very unsustainable approach. Why not get rid of it at the root? And I'm not just suggesting we simply face our fears. I'm saying seek them out and use them. Because fear and discomfort are the literal boundaries that we set for ourselves in terms of personal growth and capacity. If this is our capacity, fear and discomfort set our boundaries. And the goal here is to extend those boundaries as much as possible, or ideally, to get rid of them entirely. I thirst for discomfort and fear. I seek those experiences out, because if I feel averse to something, it means I don't have clear freedom. I'm compelled to do something specific. I used to get so uncomfortable when I walked into Mac and didn't see anyone that I recognized. I would just want to bring the food back to my dorm and eat it there by myself. But I had this damn rule. So I started sitting with strangers, and it was extremely awkward. But over time, it stopped being awkward, and now I don't care at all. When you train yourself to become aware of instances and sensations of fear or discomfort, you quickly realize how much room there is for personal growth. You realize how our involuntary function has restrained us from reaching our potential. And by following these hacks, by realizing and doing what you feel inhibited to do, you find yourself being inhibited by less, being more capable in any situation and more free to enjoy life as the adventure it is. I think in an environment like BC, a lot of people feel pressured to stick to norms. It's so easy to seek out labels or adhere to certain groups or fall into certain stereotypes when so many people come from the same backgrounds. There's so many stereotypes on campus, so many clear common paths that people follow, so many expectations. And as much as we might say that we hate these things, promising ourselves to be our own individuals and fight against the mold, inevitably we find ourselves back in the swarm. And we convince ourselves that it's what we want and where we belong. And perhaps it is. But the fact is, every single person has unique lived experience that makes us more complex than we let on. And as soon as we become aware of these boundaries that we've set for ourselves, when we learn to hack away at what we've trained ourselves to think, I'm convinced we would all be blowing each other's minds. I urge you next time you feel uncomfortable to at least think twice about what that should mean that you do next. If you don't know where to begin, let's talk. I'll give you a dice, and we'll go from there. It took me 5 awful runs on Goliath to learn that something else might be possible for myself. And 6 years later, I'm still uncomfortable and afraid a lot, but it's a lot less, and I know exactly what to do to keep growing. Use fear as a checkpoint. Throw away the labels. Do what you don't want to do. And don't waste life by believing that you're normal, because you're not. And that's amazing. Thank you.